A wealthy family's brutal destruction of a street vendor's cart shatters more than just wood and food on a sun-drenched afternoon in Beverly Hills. As Maria Gonzalez watches her livelihood collapse before her eyes, bystanders record the incident but offer no help. The wealthy perpetrators laugh, their designer clothes untouched by the mess they've created. Then a sleek black car stops. A door opens. And suddenly, the smirks vanish from the family's faces as they recognize the man stepping toward them. Keanu Reeves has just witnessed everything, and he isn't walking away. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Rodeo Drive, where luxury stores displayed items worth more than what most people earned in months. Among this showcase of wealth and privilege, Maria Gonzalez had carved out her small corner. For 5 years, she had operated her modest food cart at the edge of the shopping district, selling authentic homemade tamales that had earned a loyal following among workers in nearby offices and even some of the more down-to-earth shop employees. Maria wasn't technically supposed to be there. The zoning laws were strict, but a sympathetic police officer who had fallen in love with her cooking had told her which street corner would be overlooked, as long as she kept things clean and orderly. At 58, Maria's hand showed signs of decades of hard work. Cooking, cleaning, raising children, and now, supporting her grandchildren after her daughter's accident had left her partially paralyzed and unable to work. Her cart was a splash of color against the monochrome luxury of the district. Painted bright blue with yellow sunflowers, a small piece of her hometown in Mexico that she'd brought with her 23 years ago when she crossed the border with nothing but hope and determination. The cart itself wasn't much, but it represented everything to Maria. Independence, dignity, and the ability to put food on the table without accepting handouts. On this particular Tuesday, business had been steady. The lunch rush had come and gone, leaving Maria with just enough tamales to sell through the afternoon before heading home to start preparing for tomorrow. She was wiping down the small counter space when she noticed them approaching, a family of 4 dressed in clothes that probably cost more than her entire yearly income. The Harrington family was well known in Beverly Hills circles, though not necessarily well-liked. Richard Harrington had made his fortune in real estate development, buying up affordable housing complexes and converting them into luxury condominiums. His wife, Veronica, was a former model whose face had been stretched and filled to maintain the illusion of youth. Their twin teenagers, Chloe and Bryce, had never wanted for anything in their 16 years of life, and it showed in their entitled demeanor. "What's that smell?" Chloe's voice carried, intentionally loud enough for Maria to hear. She wrinkled her nose dramatically, nudging her brother. "Probably breaking health code violations," Bryce snickered, not bothering to lower his voice. Maria had encountered this type of behavior before. Usually, she simply ignored it, keeping her head down and focusing on her work. Pride had no place in survival, her abuela had taught her. But today, something about the teenagers' sneers, their parents' approving smiles, made her stomach clench. Richard Harrington approached the cart, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the sidewalk. He ran a manicured finger along the edge of Maria's cart, inspecting it with obvious distaste. "You know, I've been shopping on this street for years, and I don't recall ever seeing permits displayed on this operation." His voice dripped with condescension. "I'm on the city council's business committee, and I'm quite certain this area isn't zoned for street vendors." Maria kept her expression neutral, though her heart began to race. She had encountered entitled customers before, but something about Richard Harrington's cold eyes made her uneasy. This wasn't just a passing comment, there was purpose behind his words, a predatory interest that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Unbeknownst to everyone present, a sleek black Tesla had just pulled into a parking spot across the street. Behind its tinted windows sat someone who was about to change the course of the afternoon entirely. Maria fought to keep her voice steady as she responded to Richard Harrington's thinly veiled threat. She explained that while she might not have official permits displayed, she had been operating in this spot for years with the understanding of local authorities. Her words seemed to bounce off the man's expensive suit as his expression hardened. "Well, that understanding is about to change," Richard replied, pulling out his phone. "I'm texting my contact at the health department right now. This is exactly the kind of eyesore that drives down property values." Veronica Harrington stepped closer to her husband, designer sunglasses perched on her nose despite the shade provided by the buildings. "Honestly, Richard, I don't know why you're even bothering to explain. These people never listen." She emphasized "these people" in a way that made her meaning unmistakable. Maria continued preparing an order for a regular customer who had approached during this confrontation, trying to maintain her dignity through work. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped the tamales, but her movements remained practiced and efficient. "Mom, I'm bored. Can we go?" Chloe whined, scrolling through her phone without looking up. "In a minute, sweetie," Veronica replied. "Your father is handling an important civic matter." Bryce, seemingly energized by his parents' behavior, sauntered around the cart, peering at Maria's supplies with exaggerated disgust. "Do you think they even wash their hands before making this stuff?" he asked loudly. The small crowd of onlookers had grown. Some office workers on their late lunch breaks, a few tourists, and shop employees on smoke breaks had stopped to watch the scene unfold. A few had their phones out, recording the interaction but offering no intervention. Richard ended his call with a satisfied smirk. "Well, that's taken care of. The health inspector will be here within the hour. I suspect this will be your last day of business, at least in Beverly Hills." He glanced around at the growing audience, clearly enjoying his perceived role as neighborhood protector. Maria handed the wrapped tamales to her customer, who awkwardly paid and hurried away, eyes downcast. She began to pack up her supplies, recognizing that today's battle was lost. Perhaps she could relocate to another spot temporarily, somewhere these people wouldn't follow. "What are you doing?" Richard demanded. "You can't just move to another location. The inspector needs to see your operation as it is." "Please," Maria said quietly. "This is my livelihood. I have grandchildren to feed." Veronica let out a derisive laugh. "Maybe you should have thought about that before setting up an illegal business." The tension in the air was palpable as Maria continued packing, ignoring their demands to stop. She had weathered storms before. This was just another one to endure. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, witnesses would give conflicting accounts. Bryce, emboldened by his parents' behavior and seeking their approval, bumped against the cart, whether accidentally or intentionally remained a point of contention. The cart, balanced on uneven pavement, teetered precariously. "Watch out!" someone from the crowd called out. Instead of stabilizing the cart, Bryce jumped back dramatically, as if afraid of contamination. The movement caused the cart to tip further. Richard, perhaps instinctively, reached out but then pulled his hand back, unwilling to touch the cart. Maria lunged forward, but it was too late. The cart crashed onto its side with a sickening crunch. Containers burst open, spilling homemade salsa across the sidewalk. Tamales scattered, some rolling into the street. The metal frame of the cart twisted as it hit the ground, one wheel spinning pathetically in the air. The crowd collectively gasped. Maria stood frozen, staring at the destruction of her livelihood. "Oh my God," Chloe said, backing away. "Gross." "Well," Richard cleared his throat, "this actually saves the health inspector some time." Veronica's hand flew to her mouth in mock horror. "Richard, we should go. This is becoming a scene." But Richard seemed unwilling to leave without hammering his point home. "This is exactly why we need stricter enforcement of vending regulations. Look at this mess." Maria knelt beside her destroyed cart, picking up salvageable items with trembling hands. Decades of pride kept her tears at bay, but just barely. The salsa stained her apron a deep red, like a wound. "Someone should call sanitation," Veronica announced to no one in particular. "This is a public health hazard now." Bryce had taken out his phone and was filming the destruction, narrating for his social media followers. "So we just saved Beverly Hills from an illegal food vendor. Health department's going to be so grateful." The crowd of bystanders had grown larger, but remained passive. Some continued filming, others whispered among themselves, but no one stepped forward to help Maria. The invisible barrier between economic classes stood firm, even in the face of such obvious injustice. Maria gathered what little she could salvage into a plastic bag, her movements mechanical. 30 years in America, and moments like these still had the power to make her feel like a stranger. The weight of the situation crashed down on her. The cart would cost thousands to replace, money she simply didn't have. Without it, she had no income. Without income, her daughter's medical bills would go unpaid. The dominoes of disaster were lining up. Richard checked his watch impatiently. "Well, I think our work here is done. The inspector can handle the rest." It was at that precise moment that the door of the black Tesla across the street opened, and a tall figure stepped out. Keanu Reeves had planned a quiet afternoon. He had slipped into Beverly Hills for a meeting with his financial advisor, hoping to update his charitable foundation structure. Having parked his Tesla on a side street to avoid attention, he was walking back when he noticed the commotion. The crowd, the destroyed cart, the woman kneeling amid the wreckage. Details that registered in his mind with painful clarity. Keanu had grown up without wealth. His childhood had been marked by instability and struggle, experiences that had shaped his worldview even after fame and fortune found him. Standing there, watching the scene unfold, he felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the discomfort of witnessing injustice and knowing he had the power to intervene. For a moment, he hesitated. Celebrities learned early to avoid public confrontations. Each interaction risked becoming tomorrow's headline, each good intention twisted by the insatiable hunger of social media. But some principles ran deeper than caution. Keanu pulled his baseball cap lower over his eyes and began walking toward the scene. The wealthy family stood in a loose semicircle around Maria, creating a tableau of power and privilege that made Keanu's jaw tighten. The father checked his watch with theatrical impatience while the mother tapped her designer heel against the sidewalk. The teenagers continued filming the destruction, their expressions a disturbing mixture of amusement and disdain. "Excuse me," Keanu said quietly, his voice carrying despite its softness. "What happened here?" The crowd, previously focused on the family and Maria, turned toward the new voice. Recognition dawned slowly, rippling through the onlookers. Whispers began, fingers pointed, and phones redirected to capture this unexpected development. Richard Harrington glanced up, irritation flashing across his face at the interruption. "This doesn't concern," his words died abruptly as recognition struck. Veronica's perfectly maintained eyebrows shot upward, her practiced society smile automatically sliding into place. "Oh my goodness," she breathed. "You're just someone wondering why a family is standing around while this woman's livelihood is destroyed," Keanu replied, stepping past them to kneel beside Maria. "Are you all right?" he asked her softly. Maria looked up, confusion evident in her tear-filled eyes. Unlike the others, she didn't immediately recognize him. Her focus had been entirely on the disaster before her. "My cart," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of everything that cart represented. Keanu nodded, understanding the depths behind those two words. He began picking up scattered tamales and containers, placing them carefully in the bag Maria held. The simple act, a celebrity on his knees in a designer suit, cleaning food off a sidewalk, created a powerful visual that wasn't lost on the growing crowd. The Harrington twins had frozen, phones still recording but now forgotten in their hands. Bryce nudged his sister, whispering frantically. Chloe's expression had transformed from disgust to mortification as she realized their actions were being witnessed and judged by someone whose opinion actually mattered to them. "Oh my God," Chloe whispered back. "It's really him." Richard Harrington cleared his throat, quickly recalibrating his approach. "Mr. Reeves, what a surprise to see you here. I'm Richard Harrington. Perhaps you've heard of Harrington Developments? We actually have mutual connections in the industry." He extended his hand, the gesture jarringly inappropriate given the circumstances. Keanu glanced at the outstretched hand but didn't take it. Instead, he continued helping Maria salvage what little remained intact. The rejection wasn't dramatic or pointed, just a quiet choice that spoke volumes. Veronica stepped forward, desperation evident in her overly bright smile. "We were just addressing a zoning issue," she explained hurriedly. "The city has regulations about street vendors, and as concerned citizens." "Concerned enough to destroy someone's property?" Keanu asked, his voice still calm but carrying an edge now. "I've been watching for a few minutes. That didn't look like concern to me." The atmosphere shifted palpably. The crowd, previously passive, began to murmur. Several people moved closer, some offering napkins, others picking up items that had rolled away from the main wreckage. The invisible wall that had separated Maria from everyone else seemed to dissolve in Keanu's presence. The Harringtons stood awkwardly, trapped in a narrative that was rapidly spinning beyond their control. Richard's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Veronica's smile had become brittle, panic evident behind her designer sunglasses. The twins looked at each other, then at their phones, suddenly realizing they had documented their own cruelty for the world to see. Keanu stood up, helping Maria to her feet with gentle consideration. He towered over the scene, Not through intimidation but through the quiet authority of someone who had nothing to prove. The contrast between his humble actions and the Harrington's behavior couldn't have been more stark. The silence that followed seemed to stretch into infinity. Keanu stood beside Maria, his presence a shield against the Harrington's hostility. When he finally spoke, his voice remained quiet, forcing everyone to lean in slightly to hear him. An unconscious shift in power dynamics that wasn't lost on the crowd. "So let me understand this," Keanu said, gesturing toward the destroyed cart. "You felt that the appropriate response to someone selling food was to destroy their property?" Richard Harrington's face flushed deeper. "Now wait just a minute. We didn't destroy anything. The cart fell accidentally when your son bumped into it and neither of you made any attempt to stop it from falling," Keanu finished for him. "I saw it happen." Bryce's eyes widened. "I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did," Keanu cut in, his tone firm but not unkind. "Intentions matter. We all make choices, even when we're young." He turned his attention back to Richard and Veronica. "And parents set examples." The gathered crowd had grown substantially, drawn by the commotion and the celebrity presence. Shop employees had emerged from nearby boutiques. Office workers lingered, delay tactics for returning to their desks clearly visible in their casual stance. Everyone sensed they were witnessing something significant, a moment when the carefully maintained veneer of Beverly Hills propriety cracked to reveal the ugliness beneath. Veronica Harrington attempted to salvage the situation, her social training kicking in. "This has all been a terrible misunderstanding. Of course we'd be happy to help with any damages." She opened her designer purse, reaching for her wallet in a performative display of generosity. Keanu shook his head slightly. "I don't think throwing money at the problem addresses what happened here." "Then what exactly do you want?" Richard snapped, his patience visibly thinning. "We've already offered to pay for damages. What more could possibly be expected?" Maria, who had remained silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke. "Respect," she said quietly. "That's all I ever wanted. To work with dignity." Her simple words hung in the air, more powerful than any accusation could have been. Several onlookers nodded in agreement, their expressions softening as they looked at the older woman. Keanu turned to Maria. "How long have you been selling food here?" 5 years, she replied. "Same spot, every day except Sundays." "And the food?" he asked. "My grandmother's recipes. Everything made fresh each morning." Keanu nodded, then addressed the crowd. "Has anyone here tried her food?" Hands raised throughout the gathering. A young man in a security guard uniform from a nearby jewelry store spoke up. "Best tamales in the city. I eat lunch here 3 times a week." A woman in scrubs added, "She remembers everyone's name, even if you only come by once a month." Richard Harrington interrupted, his patience visibly at an end. "This is all very touching, but it doesn't change the fact that street vending without proper permits is illegal. The law exists for a reason." "Yes, laws exist for a reason," Keanu agreed, surprising the Harringtons with his apparent concession. "But why this law? Who benefits from it? Who's harmed by it?" He gestured to Maria. "Does preventing this woman from earning an honest living make Beverly Hills safer? Does it protect anyone?" Richard's expression hardened. "It protects properly licensed businesses who pay taxes and follow regulations. It ensures health standards are maintained." Keanu turned to Maria. "Have you ever had complaints about your food making someone sick?" She shook her head firmly. "Never. I take great pride in cleanliness. My kitchen at home is inspected regularly because I care for my disabled daughter. The health department knows me." Keanu addressed the crowd again. "So the harm this law prevents is... what exactly? Competition for restaurants charging $30 for a sandwich?" He let the question hang in the air. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, many nodding in agreement. The narrative was shifting visibly, and the Harringtons could sense it. What had begun as their civic-minded intervention had transformed into a public examination of systemic inequality, with them cast as the villains. Veronica tugged urgently at Richard's sleeve. "We should go," she whispered loudly enough for those nearby to hear. Chloe and Bryce had backed away slightly, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. Bryce had stopped filming, his phone now clutched tightly in his hand as if he wished he could erase the evidence of the past 30 minutes. Richard, however, seemed unwilling to concede. "Mr. Reeves," he said, attempting to reclaim control of the situation, "while your concern is admirable, you don't live in this neighborhood. You don't understand the complexities." "I understand that kindness costs nothing," Keanu replied simply. "I understand that how we treat the most vulnerable among us defines who we are." He paused, then added quietly, "And I understand that your children are watching you right now, learning what kind of people to become." Those words seemed to finally penetrate Richard's armor. He glanced at his teenagers, seeing their discomfort, perhaps recognizing for the first time how this experience was shaping them. Something in his expression shifted, not surrender exactly, but a crack in his certainty. "Come on," he said to his family. "We're leaving." Veronica needed no further encouragement, already taking several steps away. The twins followed quickly, heads down, avoiding eye contact with everyone. But just as the family was about to disappear into the crowd, Keanu called after them. "Mr. Harrington." Richard paused, turning reluctantly. Keanu's expression held no triumph, no judgment, only a quiet expectation. "The cart." The implication was clear. Richard hesitated, then reached for his wallet. "Fine. How much?" Keanu shook his head. "Not to me. To her. And not just for the cart, but for today's lost income. For the public humiliation. For everything." A tense moment passed as Richard struggled with his pride. Finally, he approached Maria directly, speaking to her for the first time as a person rather than an inconvenience. "I apologize for what happened. How much would appropriate compensation be?" Maria looked him in the eye, her dignity intact despite everything. $3,000 would replace my cart and cover lost earnings." Without further argument, Richard wrote a check, handed it to her, and walked away, his family trailing behind him. As they disappeared around the corner, the tension in the air dissipated, replaced by something new, a sense of collective witnessing, of justice served not through courts or police, but through one person's willingness to stand up for another. As the Harrington family disappeared around the corner, the energy of the crowd transformed. What had been passive observation suddenly became active participation. People stepped forward, offering help, conversation, and connection. A shop assistant from a nearby boutique brought out a chair for Maria to sit on. A barista arrived with cups of water. An elderly tourist pulled out tissues from her purse and offered them to Maria with a gentle pat on her shoulder. Keanu remained beside Maria, creating a quiet space amid the well-meaning chaos. He knelt down next to her chair, away from the cameras and phones that continued to document the scene. "Are you really okay?" he asked softly, his question meant for her ears alone. Maria clutched the check in her weathered hands, her eyes still disbelieving. "I don't know," she admitted. "It all happened so fast." "Take your time," Keanu assured her. "There's no rush." A middle-aged man in a business suit approached them, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm an attorney. I couldn't help but witness what happened here, and I wanted to offer my services if you need help with any permits or licensing issues." He handed Maria his business card. "Pro bono, of course." A woman in chef's whites pushed through the crowd next. "I own the restaurant 3 blocks over," she explained. "Until you get a new cart, you're welcome to use our kitchen after hours to prepare your food. We close at 9. It's yours until morning if you need it." The generosity continued to flow. A college student offered to create a website for Maria's business. A tech worker suggested setting up a mobile payment system for her. Each person contributed what they could, using their unique skills and resources to help repair what had been broken. Keanu watched it all with quiet satisfaction, occasionally guiding the conversation when Maria seemed overwhelmed. He never stepped in front of her or spoke on her behalf, just provided presence and support when needed. As the crowd finally began to thin, Keanu and Maria sat together on a bench a few feet from where her cart had stood. The check from Richard Harrington lay folded in her pocket, but both knew it represented only a partial solution. "Tell me about yourself," Keanu said, his manner relaxed and genuine. "Not just about today, but everything." Maria hesitated, unaccustomed to having anyone, let alone a famous actor, take interest in her life. But something about Keanu's attentive presence invited trust. Slowly, her story emerged. She had come to America 23 years ago, leaving her small village in Mexico in search of better opportunities. Her husband had died young, leaving her to raise their daughter alone. She had worked cleaning houses, washing dishes in restaurants, taking any job that would pay the bills. When her daughter Elena was injured in a car accident 4 years ago, leaving her partially paralyzed, Maria had needed more flexible work to care for her and her 2 grandchildren. The cart was Elena's idea, Maria explained. She remembered how people always loved my cooking at church gatherings. She said, "Mama, why work for others when you can work for yourself?" The cart had represented more than income. It was independence, dignity, connection to her heritage. Each tamale was made using recipes passed down through generations, prepared in the pre-dawn hours in her small kitchen while her family slept. "My grandson Jose helps me sometimes," she said, a smile warming her face for the first time. "He's 12 but already knows how to make the masa just right. My granddaughter Lucia is 9. She draws the pictures for my signs." As Maria spoke, Keanu listened without interruption, absorbing the details of a life so different from his own yet connected by universal threads: love of family, pride in work, the desire to create something meaningful. "The medical bills are the hardest part," Maria admitted, her voice dropping. "Elena needs physical therapy, but the insurance only covers 20 sessions a year. We've been saving for a wheelchair ramp for the apartment, but every time we get close, something else breaks or someone gets sick." Keanu nodded, understanding the precarious financial balance many families maintained. How one unexpected expense could disrupt everything. "The check will help with the cart," he observed. "But what about everything else?" Maria straightened her shoulders slightly. "We manage. We always have." There was pride in her voice, not the brittle, defensive pride of the Harringtons, but the earned dignity of someone who had faced countless hardships without surrendering to bitterness. Keanu was quiet for a moment, respecting her strength while recognizing her vulnerability. He had encountered this particular mix of resilience and need before, had seen how difficult it could be for people to accept help without feeling diminished by it. "I believe you," he said finally. "But managing and thriving are different things. Your family deserves to thrive." Maria looked at him carefully, as if truly seeing him for the first time. "You're not what I expected," she said simply. Keanu smiled. "I get that a lot." Around them, the remnants of the destroyed cart had been cleared away. The sidewalk had been cleaned, with no visible evidence of what had occurred. But both knew that something fundamental had shifted, not just for Maria, but for everyone who had witnessed what happened. "What will you do now?" Keanu asked gently. Maria looked down at her hands, those capable hands that had created so much despite having so little. "Start again tomorrow," she said. "What else can I do?" Keanu nodded, but his expression suggested he had something else in mind entirely. 3 weeks later, on a crisp Saturday morning, a small crowd gathered on a previously unremarkable corner at the edge of the Beverly Hills shopping district. The space, once just a widened section of sidewalk, had been transformed. A sleek, modern kiosk stood where Maria's cart had once been, its design both functional and beautiful. Bold blue paint with yellow sunflower accents echoed her original cart's colors, but everything else was new. Stainless steel cooking surfaces, a built-in refrigeration system, proper storage, and a small digital menu board. Above the kiosk, a hand-painted sign read, "Abuela's Tamales," in flowing script. Beneath it, in smaller letters, "Authentic recipes made with love since 1973. Maria stood in front of the kiosk, dressed in a crisp new apron, her gray hair neatly pinned back. Beside her, her daughter Elena sat in her wheelchair, arranging freshly wrapped tamales in a display case. On Elena's other side, Jose and Lucia proudly handed out sample cups to passers-by. Keanu moved quietly among the gathered crowd, dressed simply in jeans and a black t-shirt, intentionally deflecting attention from himself. This day wasn't about him. He had made that clear to everyone involved in the project. The transformation had begun the day after the incident, with Keanu connecting Maria to his business manager and a small team of consultants specializing in food service businesses. Together, they had navigated the labyrinthine process of permits and licenses, discovering that Maria qualified for several programs designed to support minority-owned small businesses. The kiosk itself had been custom-built, designed specifically for Maria's needs with input from Elena, who had studied architecture before her accident. Every element had been considered, the height of the counters to minimize strain on Maria's back, The width of the workspace to accommodate Elena's wheelchair on days she felt strong enough to help, the layout optimized for efficiency and interaction with customers. But perhaps the most significant transformation wasn't physical at all. Maria moved differently now, standing taller, making eye contact more readily, speaking with confidence rather than deference. The respect she had always deserved but rarely received had changed her in subtle but profound ways. "Are you ready?" Keanu asked, approaching Maria as the gathered crowd grew larger. Maria nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "More than ready. I never thought." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The impossible had become reality, and words seemed inadequate to capture the journey. Elena reached up to squeeze her mother's hand. "You earned this, Mama. All of it." A city official approached, scissors in hand for the ceremonial ribbon cutting. As cameras flashed and people cheered, Maria was invited to do the honors. The red ribbon fell away, and Abuela's Tamales was officially open for business. The crowd surged forward, eager to place orders and show support. Maria and her family worked in perfect synchronicity, fulfilling orders with practiced efficiency while maintaining the personal touches that had earned them loyal customers over the years. Keanu hung back, watching with quiet satisfaction. His financial contribution had been substantial but purposefully limited, enough to expedite the process and provide security, but structured to ensure the business remained entirely Maria's. His team had helped establish proper accounting, insurance, and legal protections, creating a foundation for sustainable success rather than temporary relief. As the morning progressed, an unexpected figure approached the kiosk. Bryce Harrington, the teenage son who had helped destroy Maria's original cart, stood awkwardly at the edge of the crowd, alone and clearly uncomfortable. When he finally reached the counter, Maria regarded him with calm dignity. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," Bryce said, his voice barely audible above the crowd's chatter. "What I did was wrong. Really wrong." Maria studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you for saying that." Bryce hesitated, then added, "My parents don't know I'm here. But I've been thinking a lot about what happened that day." He glanced around at the thriving business, the happy customers, the sense of community. "I want to be different than them." A flicker of compassion crossed Maria's face. "Being different starts with seeing clearly. You're seeing now. That's important." She wrapped a tamale and handed it to him, waving away his attempt to pay. "On the house. Everyone deserves a fresh start." Bryce took the tamale, nodded awkwardly, and disappeared into the crowd. Keanu, who had witnessed the exchange, moved closer to Maria. "That was generous of you." Maria shrugged slightly. "Holding anger only weighs down the person carrying it. Besides," she added with a small smile, "now he knows what he was missing." Across the street, a black Tesla was parked in the same spot where Keanu had witnessed the original incident. Inside sat Richard and Veronica Harrington, watching the celebration from a distance, their expressions unreadable behind designer sunglasses. 6 months after the grand opening of Abuela's Tamales, the kiosk had become a beloved fixture in Beverly Hills. What began as a story of destruction had transformed into something no one could have predicted, a symbol of resilience, community, and change. Maria had hired 3 employees from her neighborhood, providing opportunities for others who faced similar barriers. Elena now managed the business operations from home, her confidence growing alongside her responsibilities. Jose and Lucia continued to help after school, learning valuable lessons about entrepreneurship and dignity in work. The attorney who had offered his services pro bono that first day had helped Maria establish a small foundation to support other street vendors facing legal challenges. Each month, a portion of Abuela's Tamales profits went into this fund, creating a sustaining cycle of support that extended far beyond one family. The story had spread far beyond Beverly Hills, captured in viral videos and news reports that highlighted both the initial injustice and the remarkable response. Other communities had been inspired to re-examine their own vendor regulations, with several cities implementing more equitable policies as a result. For the Harrington family, the consequences had been mixed. Richard's business had suffered initially as clients distanced themselves from the negative publicity. Yet the experience had sparked uncomfortable but necessary conversations within their household. Bryce had started volunteering at a community center in a neighborhood he would never have visited before. Chloe had become more thoughtful, less dismissive of those she encountered. While neither Richard nor Veronica had publicly acknowledged their role in the incident, Subtle changes in their behavior suggested private reckonings with their values. As for Keanu, he had done what he always did, quietly stepped back once his presence was no longer needed, refusing interviews or accolades for his role in Maria's story. He occasionally stopped by Abuela's tamales, sometimes recognized, sometimes not, always treated simply as a valued customer rather than a savior. On a warm Friday afternoon, Maria stood behind her kiosk, watching the steady stream of customers with quiet satisfaction. Her tamales now sold out almost every day, with regulars knowing to come early or call ahead. The physical demands of the work remained challenging, but the struggle now felt purposeful, the rewards both tangible and profound. A young woman approached the kiosk, notepad in hand. "Ms. Gonzalez? I'm a student at UCLA researching successful immigrant-owned businesses. Would you have time for an interview?" Maria smiled. 6 months ago, she would have declined, uncomfortable with attention, doubtful that her story mattered. Now she gestured to the small seating area beside the kiosk. "Of course," she said. "I have many things to share." As Maria began recounting her journey, she glanced briefly at the corner where her old cart had been destroyed. That moment of humiliation and loss, painful as it had been, no longer defined her. Instead, it had become simply one chapter in a much larger story, a story about seeing and being seen, about the ripple effects of both cruelty and kindness, about the power of one person standing up when it would have been easier to walk away. In the end, what had begun with destruction had become something far more powerful. A reminder that even in the most divided society, humanity and connection remain possible. All it takes is one person willing to kneel down and help another stand up. The rich family had destroyed a cart, but in doing so, they had inadvertently helped build something far more valuable. A community that refused to look away.